Good day. On behalf of Joint Industry Project Corrosion Inhibitors, I would like to welcome you all for the first panel discussion uh, on the importance of precision in corrosion inhibitor selection testing for oil and gas applications. Today's panelists are all from oil transmission pipeline companies, so we are going to hear the operator's perspective. And today's moderator is Mohsen Achour, and we have got four panelists: Trevor, Stephen, Arnold, Perry, and Ben Johnston. I will introduce Mohsen, and then Mohsen, you take it away from here. Dr. Achour has been in the field for the last 30 years or so. I know Mohsen personally very well, and he came to US through the ConocoPhillips support to do his PhD, and Conoco never left him. And just before this meeting, Trevor was kind of congratulating Mohsen for all his achievements. And Mohsen has been with the AM for the last 25 years, and currently he is the chair for the Corrosion Committee for Pipeline Research Council International. And Mohsen, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Sankara, for the kind words. I thought you were talking about somebody else for a bit. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. This is, as indicated by Sankara, this is I'll call it, you call it a webinar, but it's not really a webinar. It's more of a, panel discussion, around a very important topic, which is the development of standard test methods with known precision. We have four panelists today. Trevor Place from Enbridge Pipeline. I'm gonna ask each panelist to say a few words about themselves, because I was trying to find some information, and I went to LinkedIn, but probably for some people there's not enough information there, so I didn't really want to butcher their rich experience. So when we get to the questions, please, the first time you speak, if you could just a few words about your experience, and especially related to the topic at hand. So again, and we have the four panelists shown on the slides: Trevor, Stephen, Perry, and Ben. So without any further delay, we can tailor 5 questions, but really we're not really limited to the question. It's just to start the discussions. And what we'll do, we'll just go through the five panelists with each question, and but the floor is open to chime in after the four panelists have spoken about the question. Then we will take the Q&A, or we'll take the discussion. So we'll go one question at a time after we give the chance to our panelists to kind of speak to the topic, or to the questions. The first one was kind of really a nice starting question: is why do we think development of standard methods with certain precision is important to our industry? The answer might be obvious, but it's probably more challenging than we think it is. So let's kick it off, and I'm just gonna go through how I see the panelists on my screen. So Trevor, you show up first on my screen on the left. So Trevor, could you please just give us a few words, and I'll say take a couple of minutes, even a little bit longer if you want, to speak to why do we think this development of these standard methods is important in our industry.
Okay, thanks, Mohsen. I think I'll start with the introduction that you indicated we should do. So, Trevor Place, I'm a principal engineer with Enbridge Pipelines. I've been working in the industry for 36, going on 37 years. And external corrosion to begin with. I'm a NACE accredited CP specialist. And then about 21 years ago, I switched over to the inside of the pipe, and I've been doing internal corrosion prevention work for the last 21 years. So that's basically it. I'm one of these pathological sharers, which frustrates people sometimes because I'll talk way too much. But I do believe it's so critically important to share knowledge, information, and expertise and learnings. And some of my peers that are joining me on the panel here, I thank all of you because we have conversations frequently that would have our lawyers in our companies having conniptions, but it's through that level of collaboration that we actually make changes in the industry and we move the needle, which is kind of what we're doing now with these test methods. So I'll answer the question now. Standards are critically important in just about every field. Standardized test methods ensure that the work is done consistently so that the results are meaningfully comparable, and that's really the important thing to keep in mind. Standards don't just write themselves, though. So it takes a lot of effort for us as a group to come together, and it's hard to come to an agreement when we all, especially when we've got decades of doing things differently. But as an end user of corrosion inhibitors, what I think is most important is to have the results that I get and my laboratories get should be comparable and useful to other pipe operators. Without standardization, there's simply no way to compare these data, and as a result, we can't compare performance, we can't compare inhibitors, we can't, it ends up being kind of a Wild West. So that's why I think standard test method development is important.
Thank you, Trevor. And I'd like, Sankara, and I hope you don't mind, I'd like really to follow up the second question with the first question and keep the same panelists to speak to that because they are intertwined. So your last statement to say that's why we need the standard question, but these standards, so that we kind of get on top of selecting the correct chemicals for a given application. But in my mind, when you say the word standards, it always brings up: is there going to be issue? Is that going to be challenging? So do you foresee issues? Not that if we don't develop, both. Do you see issues if we develop or if we don't develop? Meaning, obviously, you spoke to if we don't have these standards, then the issue is that we're not going to be, controlling the effectiveness of our chemical programs and so forth, or maybe even the operability of our assets safely. That's the piece if we don't have the standards. But now, so that's why we do need the standards. So my question is, are there issues of, do you see challenges in the issue of putting standards in place, especially for such, I'll say, not an exact science, selecting chemicals for a given operation, that it comes with a lot of uncertainties, how you could do that, whether in the lab or in the field. So can you speak to, challenges or issues behind development standards in this field?
Sure. So, I mean, before I talk about the challenges, I think it's worth saying like where we're the risk of not developing standards. And I said Wild West in my previous response. And it's a Wild West, a controlled Wild West. I mean, we right now we've got lots of people, there's owner operators partnering up with their chemical vendors, and they're writing interesting research. It's great, which shows that the industry is doing some stuff, but sometimes that work is only relevant to the operator and that have written the work because it's not strictly comparable. And if the results aren't repeatable and they're not relevant, then it's a barrier to development of new research. So now to the question you asked, like, so the first challenge is it's really hard to get people to agree to change. In the first parts of the JIP, we went out and we crowdsourced what people are. We found out people are relying on a lot of the same tests, but they're doing things slightly differently. And it's going to be hard for people that have a wealth of experience doing it a certain way to agree that there might be merit in doing it a slightly different way, because it might mean disconnecting their historical data from the new data they're going to be getting a different way. And what they did before was tried and true for their system, so they like it. And so that's a barrier. It's always a barrier to have things do things differently. But the opportunities are that improved standardization is going to give me and others confidence in other people's data. So right now, I look at papers that get published and I say, well, that's very interesting, but the way that they did the work is very much not like my pro. So it's interesting, but I would have to do a whole pile of work and a whole pile of money to try to validate that what they found was going to be good for me. So the opportunity is I'll have greater trust and I'll be able to make better decisions about new chemicals. I really think that in the end, this is going to usher in a whole new level of chemical corrosion inhibitor development, because vendors will understand that they'll have more money to spend on research, because the barriers to marketing a new chemist reduced because there's standardization in the testing, and more people trust the data.
Okay, great. Thank you, Trevor. Steve, I'd like you please first of all introduce yourself, then basically speak to the first three questions in a way, starting with why it is important for us to do standards, then what happens if we don't have them, but then also what Trevor just spoke to, challenges and opportunities when we want to develop them. So I think those three questions kind of they rhyme. So instead of speaking to each one of them, so why don't you just kind of go through the three questions and take as much time as you need, but keep 5 minutes or so, please, Steve.
Yeah, so I'll introduce myself as well real quick. Stephen Arnold, I'm a corrosion engineering supervisor with Flint Hills Resources. We're primarily a liquids pipeline operator in the midstream part of our business, and I've been in the industry for about 10 years, with most of the early part of my career being pretty heavily focused on internal corrosion and dealing a lot with corrosion inhibitor programs and corrosion inhibitor selection for crude oil pipelines. I think Trevor hit on some of the same points that I had when I think about that first question. Why are developing standard test methods important? One of the things that sticks out to me is selecting a corrosion inhibitor or changing a corrosion inhibitor from an operator's perspective is kind of a high risk decision that you're making. It's a little different from other additives that you might inject into a pipeline, like something like red dye injection into diesel, or maybe something like a drag reducing agent, where you might be more willing to do a field trial and just see how it performs without performing lab testing first. But when you're dealing with corrosion, we always say you can't put the metal back, right? Well, after corrosion has already happened. So from my perspective, having standard test methods would give me a lot better confidence that when I am qualifying an inhibitor, I'm using a test method that's validated, that other people are using, that there are multiple labs that can perform the test in the same way, such that I can take the results that I got in the lab and feel confident that that's also going to translate into the field. So I'm not taking such a big risk with the change that I'm making. So I think there's lots of different reasons that standard test methods are important, but that's one of the big ones for me, is just I want to have something validated that I can use to make this important decision for what I'm injecting into my asset, right? In terms of challenges or issues, I think one of the risks that's out there as an industry is there's a risk of, if we don't develop standards, potentially having some sort of a prescriptive regulation that could be imposed. In the United States, for example, we have some pretty specific requirements that we have to follow for cathodic protection, for example, annual CP surveys or bi-monthly electrical checks on our rectifiers and critical bonds. And it is a little bit of a Wild West right now for internal corrosion, but there is that risk, right? That if we don't have a standard way of evaluating corrosion inhibitors as an industry, that we could at some point down the line have more prescriptive requirements that we have to follow that may not allow us to take a risk-based approach on how we're using corrosion inhibitors in our assets. So that would be another potential issue if we don't develop standard test methods. And then in terms of challenges or opportunities, one of the challenges I think of the process of developing or eventually adopting standard test methods is ultimately they're going to have to be accepted by the suppliers, right? We're going to go develop these test methods, and then in an ideal world, suppliers are going to need to test their products using these standard test methods so that the data is available and can be compared between different products that are out there on the market. I think that's something that they will do. Like Trevor mentioned, having standards is hopefully going to give a little bit more transparency to suppliers in terms of how operators are going to go about selecting chemistries that they're going to use in their assets, and maybe give them a little bit more clearer path to market for new products that they're developing. So I think that's a challenge that we can overcome, but it's one of the challenges that's out there.
Thank you, Steve. Again, I have a few questions for both you and Trevor, but we'll take that as Q&A after we finish these three questions with all the panelists. So next I see is Ben. Ben, I don't know Ben very well, so I'm looking forward to hear from you, Ben.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon. Ben Johnston, Pembina Pipelines. I'm part of the corrosion controls team, specializing in internal corrosion. Came over through legacy companies, Semcams, Energy Transfer, now Pembina. So went through integration back in 2022 with Pembina. My background is operations and maintenance. So I came over to the corrosion controls team almost a year ago. So it'd be May of last year. At that time, I joined this industrial project. Really what I'm getting out of this is just understanding what everyone else is doing, understanding the challenges within the industry, and looking to help support with standardization and to move this forward. Yeah, so definitely background is when it comes to crude oil, ethane, not a lot of experience, mostly experience in sour gas, transportation, and processing. All right. Yeah, I guess my thoughts on development of standard test. It's really around accuracy and reliability. Increasing that standardization through published procedures. It helps both with the end user and labs and the chemical providers, so that you get that commonality and standardization. Yeah, speaking to, challenges and opportunities. So definitely one of the challenges I see is just the implementation. Once kind of the project is completed, how is that going to be rolled out? How does the end user incorporate that into their IMP? And then how do the labs and the chemical vendors bring that forth? Um, as far as opportunities, I think it helps with quality assurance. Um, I think lab competency would improve, and then further development. So even though we're developing these standards, I think it opens the door for future development or improvement. Uh, yeah, I think I'm not sure if you want me to touch on anything else.
No, I'm fine. It's fine. You spoke to all those three. I'm sure we'll come back to you later on
Sounds
in the
good.
Q&A. So we'll come back to you. Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate you. Um, Perry, I think I don't. It's not. Yeah, Perry is next, right? Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Please
You
introduce
can hear me
yourself.
all.
Introduce yourself again and speak to these three questions. Three first questions, please.
For sure. You can hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Perfect. So my name's Perry O'Hearn. Currently working with Enbridge Pipeline based here in Calgary, Alberta. Been in the industry, primarily focused on asset integrity for about 10 years now. Kind of bridged between external, internal, but my primary focus has been in internal corrosion management. So that in that world, pigging, chemical inhibitors, biocides. So kind of run the gambit on that. For myself, why I think the development of standard test methods is important is basically kind of rehashing the commentary that Steve and Trevor and Ben have alluded to. Gets us to see reliability, repeatability, accuracy. One of the other commentaries that comes to mind is efficiency and cost reduction. Generally speaking, once the standard is in place, it definitely lends itself to more efficiency within an RFP process, thereby reducing costs associated from the midstream side. So it just it supports industry comparability, compatibility, comparability. It also supports future R&D and development and future innovation, but by providing general guidance from which to work from. To the second question, sorry. For myself, why do I think what issues if we don't develop the standard? Inconsistencies, unreliable results is always a big one that comes to mind. Reduced confidence in the data. Safety and compliance risk is also a key factor in developing, establishing a proper standard. And then difficulty comparing suppliers and technologies. If sometimes when a standard is established, it's getting everybody on the same page, which really can pose a challenge. But once you have, I guess, industry adoption, have everybody on the same playing field, it lends itself to more a positive benefit to the industry as a whole. And then in terms of challenges and opportunities, achieving an industry consensus is definitely the challenge. Having everybody aligned and on the same page. Another thing that comes to mind is rapid technological change with developments in AI. Who knows really what what might emerge. So I guess developing the standard and having it kept current with the current developments in technology, it'll be a key focus. In terms of opportunities, we'll achieve an industry-wide alignment, improve quality and reliability, better support innovation and R&D. I see these as key opportunities coming out of the standard creation.
Thank you, Pei. I think at this point, so for these three questions, first of all, having the role of moderator, sometimes you have the luxury that you have an opportunity to voice your opinion as well. So I'll just take 1 minute to just kind of hit the main concern that I have, especially around the third bullet point, third question. But while I'm doing that, I think if you're in the attendance and you have a comment, please raise your hand so that Sankara will see it or I'll see it, and we'll give you the floor once I've finished. I'm kind of going to play the devil's advocate a little bit in the third part. I mean, it's a no-brainer. The first question, second question, we all need these. They are important, and if we don't have them, it's going to make our job difficult. I mean, that's no-brainer. But now, the crux of things is that if we want to develop them, I think the biggest challenge is to come up with the right ones, the right standards, a standard that everybody is comfortable with, because here, most of us are pipeline operators, but also the other partner on this are chemical vendors. And unless we all stack hands on standard test method that makes sense to us as operators, means they mimic, they simulate what we have in the field, but also something that when they're taken into the lab by chemical vendors, the chemical vendors feel comfortable that they can apply them and give us meaningful answers in the right chemistry that we're asking for. That I don't know if it is quite a challenging task, I think. And the reason I've always, my experience is I've always been looking to guidelines, practices in this area, because they come with certain bias, right? Depends who's coming up with them. Are they guidelines given to us by vendors, or are guidelines that we have them in house? So I've always been comfortable in looking at those and choose the best practice, or the guideline that we for our operation, we feel that something makes sense, and apply those rather than being pushed to use standard. Because standard test method, if a standard means it's going to be the law in a way during the bids that we launch to get contracts with the chemical vendor. So I'd like to get any of the panelists if they have an opinion on that. I mean, should we go the route of standard practices or best practices rather than standard test method, given the challenge that coming up with some standard test method that everybody agrees on? Then I will follow up with another part of the question. So any of the panelists also, and the participants, because all the panelists here are operators, right? Pipeline operators. I see in the chat that there's the participant there, at least couple that I know of, they are chemical vendors. I'm also interested that the chemical vendors share their opinion with the participant. And the third question, because as I said, first and second question is a no-brainer, right? We all agree on that. So the floor is open to the panelists and also to the participants to talk to the point where, do we really need standard test methods, or could we be satisfied with best practices and guidelines?
my hand up here, so I don't think you can see that motion. So I'd like to jump in on this.
Please.
Can you hear? So I think we need standards. And the reason I say we need standards is we already have best practices. And the reason that we are in this JIP together is that we feel that getting where we should be with best practices. Now, I'm going to point out to the reality from a chemical vendor's perspective. Now, the mid world represents probably less than 1% of the total internal corrosion performance chemistry market. So our chemical vendor partners, who I have the utmost esteem for, I mean, they've done a ton of internal research and they've come up with better chemistries, and they're largely done in purely aqueous environments because that's the environment that serves best where the majority of the market is, like downhole and upstream. And so that's great. But we are coming to realize that the particulars of a midstream system are sufficiently different that chemistries that work really well in an upstream environment don't perform very well in the upstream system. I've published a crap load of stuff on diluent pipelines. I apologize, my potty mouth here. A lot of documents on this diluent we were operating, that we were using a state-of-the-art, flagship chemistry of a certain vendor, and it didn't work very well in our system. That was really well suited for our environment. We actually we've recently done an analysis, we've saved like $15 or $20 million over like 8 years. All of that was chemistry. Only a little bit of that was chemistry. The majority of the benefit was all of the ancillary stuff we were doing, like excessive pigging, line with the pipeline, and cleanliness and so on. So I think that we need standards. Now I feel it's a gentle push to get our chemical vendors to find standard test methods which are more suited to each of the 27 different kind of environments that we have, because it's a similar tests with slightly modified conditions that resonate with these individual sectors of the industry. And if we can get there, we'll be able to start to compare performance of chemistries. The end users will have greater confidence, and the chemical vendors, this is where the money is. The chemical vendors are going to realize that they can spend more money on research because the barriers to marketing the product are reduced because this is the standardized comparability of the chemistries. And I see Stephen's got his hand up, so I'll hand it off to Stephen now.
Thank you, Trevor.
I was going to hit on the point that you mentioned there at the very end, that I think in my mind, the big problem, or one of the biggest problems, is you have this huge barrier to being able to actually change a chemistry or implement a new chemistry in the field. I've had experiences personally where a chemical supplier may reach out to me and they're marketing a new product that they've developed, and look at this test data that we've got, and from my perspective, it's like, okay, it looks great, but you can't compare it. There's no way to compare it to what I'm using currently, right? So even if it is an effective chemistry, it's very difficult for me to make the economic case that it's going to be more cost effective without standards that can really directly compare those two chemistries one-to-one. And admittedly, a standard test method may not be under the exact same conditions as what I have in my pipeline, but it at least gives me a way to compare and to make those decisions and not have to go through all of this additional testing, potentially with a third-party lab, to ultimately get to that decision point. In my mind, that's the biggest problem that we have, and that's something that you need standard test methods to solve, right? As opposed to just a best practice or standard practice document.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Got your vote. So 2 votes for yes to standards. Not to put you on the spot, Alan and Milan, I'd like to hear the chemical vendor perspective. No, if you don't mind, if you don't have an opinion, that's fine too.
Well, hi, Mohsen. It's Alan speaking. Well, I did work for a chemical vendor for a long time, but I don't anymore, so I can be a bit more impartial, I guess. But on point number three, I think one challenge that hasn't been mentioned is I think is going to be the adoption of these standards, not by the chemical vendors, but by the oil and gas operators, because a lot of those oil and gas operators, have their own standard methods of qualified inhibitors. They have their own standard tests, whether it's autoclave, HPRC, flow loop, jam impingement, or whatever. I think the bigger challenge, or an equally big challenge, will be getting the end users to accept these standard methodologies and get them to move away from their in-house practices. That's one thing that hasn't been mentioned, which I think will be a big challenge here.
Okay, thank you, Alan, for sharing.
Hey, Mohsen, Milan here. I have one comment which probably relates most to the question number 3, but I believe it can be applied generally, and it relates to testing data in general, but the corrosion standard in particular, and that's the clear definition what is test result telling you, but equally important what they do not tell you. There are a lot of expectations and unrealistic expectations and misunderstanding on the user sides regarding the ASTM standards. I don't know how many times I was asked in my previous lives to, either internal or external request, please run the test according to G170. And some of you know that Shankara and I, years back, we work on that standard, and thanks to Shankara, it was published, and it is a standard guide. Therefore, there is no way nobody in the world can run the test according to G170, right? So I think the part of the standard development, or somebody, it should be embedded in it. What are the expectations and what is test is good for? Because for many people, and including myself, way in the past, the ASTM standard is something like gospel. This is it. This is the ultimate test. It tells you the source of your problem. Not really. So part of the standard development also should include some education part to the potential users and receivers of the data generated according to those standards. Thanks.
No, well said, Milan. Thank you for sharing. Please raise your hand if you have something to say, but I'll just keep going a little bit and do these 3 questions. I think a follow-up on the 3rd question. Again, this is based on what I've seen over the past few years, that it is a reality. It is a challenge for us to simulate field conditions and the lab testing. I remember, actually tell you too, Alan is here, right, on the call. There's one time we were working on a project, and he told me that he could give me a nice product that will pass the lab test that we proposed, but he had his doubts if that chemical will work in the field. And that's the reason, because he knows the component he can put in the test to pass the pitting test that we're going to do, but he knows that probably not what the solution is. So there's this fact that there is a challenge, no matter how much we can do to simulate the field condition in the lab testing. And now, if we're going to standardize the lab testing, the test method in the lab, and we're going to rely on the answers from that lab testing to qualify to select the best performer, there are chances, if we didn't do that part correctly, that best performer we're going to take to the field is not going to give us the best performance. So my question is, how can we overcome this challenge of being able to simulate the field condition to lab testing? And it's been an evergreen question. So I don't know if anybody has a kind of an insight how maybe we should do, because we need to do that before we come up with standard test method. If we don't know how to do that, how to simulate field to the lab, then I think we're gonna be challenged to come up with these standard test methods. Any thoughts?
Yeah, hi, Mohsen. It's Arnold again. When I did this testing, I thought towards the end of my time doing it, there was a massive disconnect between what we did in the lab and field testing. And evaluating the product in the lab. We did all these testing, spend months testing a product in the lab, and you send it to the field, and there'll be very little monitoring of the performance of that product in the field. So that's, in my opinion, we got to a point where we were just testing products to pass lab tests, and we weren't looking to see how these products performed in the field. That was everywhere, all around the world. We would see this problem, but I think the biggest disconnect between lab and field, and maybe have a comment, is simply the lack of field crude in the testing. It was as simple as that. We weren't using field crude in the testing, made a massive difference the performance of the products, and then they passed lab tests with synthetic fluids, and then didn't work so well in the field. I think that was that was the big disconnect between lab and field, was the lack of field crude. I don't know what you find at Intertek, but that's what we always saw at SLB.
Yeah, I will comment, but I see some gentlemen have had hands up, so I'll wait until after that.
I don't see the heads. Do you see them, Sankara? Can you call the
Trevor and Ayu, or Trevor and Ayu? Trevor, you go first.
Okay, I'll go first here. So I think that's why Millen and Alan, that's why we're doing what we're doing, and there's an opportunity. This discussion that we have coming to standardized tests is an opportunity both for the chemical us to say, hey, we want something which is more comparable to what's happening in the field. That will give us trust that what we do in the laboratory is actually going to be emulated in the field. You can educate us that, okay, well, one of the most important parameters is pressure or pH, or Alan, you said that access to field crude, and that's great. Like I understand that, and always we should be trying to use field fluids if we can, but problem is there's so much variability in how some of these laboratory tests are being done that even something as simple as a RCE, you can't trust that it's necessarily, you need to have a pedigree on the lab to be able to say that the results that you're getting in doing this test using synthetic materials is comparable. And if you can't trust a baseline test to give you comparable results, how can you trust the results you get, no matter how good or how effectively you model or using actually field products? So I see that we're working in the same direction, and it's the laboratory folks, that you guys on the chemical side that have the most experience actually in the lab. We've got to bring that to us so that we can make sure that the stuff that we're standardizing is going to be truly comparable. Because right now I can't trust a laboratory unless I know that they can get an expected result using some standardized materials and precision statements.
Right.
Thank
you, Trevor. Being aware of the time, Ayu and Brian, please take a few minutes to share your comments. So let's go with Ayu first, please.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Ayu Kola with Saudi Aramco, based in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. I just wanted to comment a little bit more on question 3 here. And for me, having spent some time starting out my career in the oil and gas industry with a producer, and then spending the last 10, 11 years on the vendor side of things before coming back to a producer now, I've had the opportunity to see things from different perspectives. One of the things I would like to recommend to producers is to consider expenses in asset integrity, like buying chemicals, so corrosion inhibitors, as an investment as opposed to an expense. If you see it from that perspective, it provides that environment for more collaborative work, which is what we are doing here. It is almost impossible to perfectly replicate what happens in a pipeline, in a well, under field conditions in a laboratory. From from that perspective, I think producers need to engage more with chemical vendors, and instead of asking for more tests and tests, what about producers also investing in tests themselves, coordinated by chemical vendors? Oh, so that's more like a question in this respect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ayu. If we do have time, I'll come back. I have an answer or at least a reply for you. But let's go to Brian. Brian, if you take a minute or two, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mohsen. Yeah, I agree with the comment, Ayu, that corrosion management is an investment, but that's a whole challenge in and of itself. I think one of the benefits from a system like this that allows various vendors to be tested by labs that have a consistent process is for those organizations where purchasing seems to carry a very big stick. If you have every company who's blending or manufacturing a product for inhibition and there's standardized tests that are performed, there's very little that purchasing can do to say that somebody's put their thumb on the scale. And coming from an organization where that was a very prevalent opinion, I think that's a massive win for the end user. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Brian. Again, we'll come back if we have time. I'm aware of that we have about 10 minutes. We want to cover the last two questions. They are also intertwined. I think they're talking about people who's going to make all this happen. Really, we spoke. So far it's all about technicality, about things behind standards, but it's about people. So the way the question will roll out from your experience, who led the changes typically, and who do you think implemented the standard test method once they've developed, who's going to implement them? I think they're also kind of intertwined. So basically the question is, who's going to champion all this? Whether the development of the method, the standard method, or the application of the standard method, the implementation. So I'll give literally maybe a minute and a half to each panelist. Then we'll take maybe a question or two. So again, I'm going to read them as I see them. Let's keep the same order. Trevor, please.
Okay, off script here. Could you restate your new question? I mean, I was kind of prepared.
The question is, who's going to champion the development of these, these standards and leading the changes? And
I think it's collaboration. It's a collaboration between the end users and the suppliers. I mean, going back to our questions that were asked before, like who's led the changes historically, and I think it's always been driven by chemical vendors. They've been the ones that have made changes. They've made change developments in chemical tests. They've made changes in chemistries, and I appreciate everything that our chemical partners have done. The issue is that we end up having a close knit relationship, and it becomes a barrier to exploring anything else, and we can't compare things across different things, which makes it hard for chemical vendors to break into new business. So, as Perry said, what's changing is that we're facing greater financial pressures as owner operators, and we're no longer content to know that what we are doing is working. We also want to be assured that what we're doing represents the most cost-effective solution. And so for that, we need to be able to explore new chemistries, but it's beyond our ability to spend $250,000 or $500,000 to do a round robin every so often to see what's the best chemistry on the market. It'd be so much better if we had standard test methods that everybody can sort of publish how, or like if we, I'm not going to say publish, but we could solicit, or a chemical vendor could come to us and say, we've got this chemistry that newly developed, and it's actually really kicking butt over the other stuff that we were using, and we'd like you to give it a try. And now instead of just saying, oh, okay, I trust you and I'll do this, we can say, well, show the data. And then we look at the data and we kind of compare it. And we say, you know, that's worth it, and I'm going to chase this. So I think that's the driver typically has been the vendors, and now we've got new pressures. And I'm just going to put my most optimistic glasses on what the future is going to look like. And I think that I just think that we're going to catalyze more collaboration and more innovation. I mean, I know our chemical vendors have spent tons and tons of money, and we appreciate but if they know that they've got a better avenue to break down barriers to marketing their products because they're standardized test methods that the industry generally trusts, they're going to spend more money developing products that are specific for these different applications. And I'll leave it at that.
So collaboration, partnership, that's the answer, I think, what I hear. Steve?
Yeah, I'll maybe touch a little bit on the last question there. In terms of implementing standards, I think it's going to be tough for us to completely get rid of the need to run specific tests to mimic our field conditions, right? But I think the hope in developing standard test methods is that we can make the whole process more efficient. You know, maybe you have a screening test. You know, that's kind of the word that we've used throughout the JIP, where you use standard test methods and standard test conditions, and that hopefully allows you to cut down on the time and expense that you've got to spend to really dig in and select a chemistry under your field conditions. So I know that that's something that's mentioned is just some of the difficulty in trying to replicate field conditions. I think that's always going to be a challenge that we'll have to deal with, right? But the goal is maybe to try to make that a little bit more efficient than it is today.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Understood. Perry, please.
Oh, sure. To Trevor's point, yeah, I think it's been a collaborative effort all along. But I think as time has progressed, there's been new challenges that have come to fruition. From my perspective, I think from at least an operator's mindset, it's basically like the changes are being driven by financial need, regulatory requirements, and operations and technological advancement, kind of more or less stacked in that order. In terms of what I envision of implementing the standard practice within the company is I'd like to see it as like the foundation of internal corrosion management within my corporate structure, at least. That way, you know, if the next person in my role can come in and have a good foundation to build from, and then the guidance that would best be suited to keep everything on the straight and narrow and a good path forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Finally, I think I have been right.
Yes. Yeah, just to touch on question 4 there. Yeah, I think, you know, this again, collaboration, and I think this was driven out of you know, being reactive, understanding that we have activity within our pipelines. We need to do some sort of mitigation. So it's always been, you know, like I said, reactive. So, you know, moving that needle, I think we need to get predictive. And I think standardization will help us achieve that. Now, there's lots of challenges. You know, if you're a midstreamer or an upstream producer, depending on reservoir and zones, like the chemistry is changing all the time. So, you know, different methods for fracking or completions, that changes the outcome on some of this as well. So we're seeing a lot more MIC in our pipelines. So it's just, yeah, I don't think it's something that you can build a standard and walk away from. It's something that's going to have to, it's going to be modified and changed and updated and improved as we see the needs. So, yeah, and then implementation. Again, I think this comes back down to, our not only the vendors but the operators adopting the change and accepting it. So that's always a challenge. It's going to be a challenge moving forward. It doesn't matter what it looks like. I think that's the biggest hurdle. So thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I think what I'm hearing as well, you agree with Steve that there's always going to be that specialized testing that needs to be, or supplemental testing that needs to be, even post the implementation of the standard test methods, to make sure that we're responding to the expectation, I guess, of the operators. For me, just very quick on number 5, I really think if we are successful in developing the standard test method, they're the best way, the most direct way to implement it is when the operators start including in their, when we launch call for bids for chemicals, whether corrosion inhibitors or others. If we start referencing in our document when we launch the call for bid, say use the standard method blah 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 for corrosion inhibitor batch treatment with corrosion inhibitor. So I think if we get there, that means that's really probably the best way to reinforce and to implement the stats method. So now, will we get there? I really think it depends on how successful we are in putting together these stent test methods. So if we stack hands and we have them, I think it's the best way to do it is to start referring to them when we launch call for bids for for chemicals. We do have we are right on the dot, but we probably, if there is some burning question, we'll take one. We'll go a little bit over time if you don't mind, Shankara. But I don't see hands. But anybody has any comment? Before, I'd like for Shankara to have the last word, I guess. Not because he's been the one person I know of in the industry that is always a champion standards, and he's really good at it. So I'd like to give him the final word to kind of put this discussion in perspective and also have some words of wisdom from him as well. So if I don't see any hands, then Shankara, the floor is yours for the remaining of the time.
Thanks, Mohsen and all the panelists and all the discussions. I really appreciate it. We are continuing to learn, but I keep hearing collaboration, coordination is a success. And I think Trevor hit that one, and I think that's where we are leading it to. And I really appreciate it. That's all I have, Mohsen. Collaboration and coordination. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Shankara. Again, this topic probably merits a whole one-day workshop rather than 1 hour panel discussion. But I think we at least captured the big rocks. Thank you again for your time. Sorry that we went 2 minutes over time. Appreciate your participation, and Shankara, thank you for coordinating all this.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for hosting Mohsen.
Yeah. Good day to
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye.